So how often would you say you cry at work?
I would say conservatively about once a month, maybe. Is that high?
Work is supposed to be a serious place where you get stuff done. But what happens when emotions bleed into it? I was curious to see what people thought about crying in the office. Why do we do it, and what does the research say?
Arguments will often make me cry. I've inherited this from my mother, which is like, you get very frustrated and angry, and then you start crying, and they're like, what's wrong? And you're like, I'm just so angry at you.
Management, to me, provokes emotional reactions often, in part because, I care for people, and I care for the people that I supervise. And so the moments that stick out to me when I've cried have been about that.
For me, it's always a combination of being tired, being stressed, sort of getting in a mentality where I'm already feeling sorry for myself, and then in some way that becomes reinforced, and then I just get into a very woe is me frame of mind and then start crying.
This is a little bit more of an issue for women than it is for men, just because women cry more than men. There are a couple of reasons for this. One of them is hormonal. Women create more of this hormone called prolactin, which is associated with crying. Also, people don't actually cry when they're sad, they cry when they're frustrated. And some researchers think that because women are socially discouraged from expressing their anger through blowing up or yelling, they instead sort of feel this kind of helpless anger that's associated with crying.
If I'm crying at work and it's like an uncontrollable situation, I don't want it to be happening. I'll always be trying to make myself stop or whatever you can do, and just be like, just listen to my words, ignore this.
I feel like you have to be stoic at work. I do cry. It's just like going to a conference room and closing the door.
Why do you feel like you have to be stoic at work?
I don't know. I feel like there's a stigma attached to it. A coworker has seen me tear up while reading a story, or maybe it was a kitten video. And that was the thing that he mentioned for the rest of the months that we were coworkers.
Surprisingly, there can be some benefits to crying at work. Some studies show that it makes people feel more connected to you and more willing to help you. But it can also make you seem incompetent and overwhelmed. Do you ever think it can be that crying at work can be a positive thing?
Mostly it strikes me as either unprofessional or something you said earlier, you better have a reason.
If you're going to cry, it's better to do it in front of your coworker instead of your boss, because people tend to become less empathetic as they move up the chain of command. And unfortunately, some studies show that men are viewed more positively for crying at work than women are.
I was just kind of shaking. My manager, I turned and he saw, and it was like the Crypt Kid. He saw exactly what was going on and came over, helped me out. He literally was just grabbing my shoulders and saying no, you're fine. Everything's okay. And I respect him and love him to this day because of that interaction.
So how often would you say people cry in your office?
I would say maybe a half dozen times in the last 10 or 15 years. So every other year, maybe every year, once a year.
And how do you react usually?
Well, when I was a younger manager, I think it made me anxious and nervous. And more recently, I just wait. Most people just want to get through it and still talk. And I learned it made me uncomfortable. Then I realized that they were way more uncomfortable than I was. So just go with it.
So let's say you're in a performance review and you feel a cry coming on. How do you make yourself stop? For that, we turn to someone who has a lot of experience managing his emotions on cue, a professional actor.
If I was in this moment being interviewed by you and I was feeling like I was maybe about to burst into tears and I was trying to hide it from you, I would probably sit up in my chair and I would make sure that my feet were connecting with the floor, and I would make sure that I was relaxing in my throat and breathing deeply and finding where my tailbone connects to the chair and really being present.
Okay, so now let's say you have the opposite situation. You're in a great mood, everything's going well, but your character is totally distraught.
A sort of broken kind of shuddering breath that leads me to a place that I recognize as how I, Stephen, feel when I'm feeling upset. Trying to keep myself from crying can help me cry.
So we've got taking deep breaths, just telling yourself not to cry. But if you can't stop the tears from coming, maybe just don't worry about it. Crying is a normal part of work. What do you think of people who cry at work?
I think they're people.